Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. Today, we are going to go along the West Coast. We're going to preview the top players in the Pac-12 Conference. So we're going to talk about all those teams out in the West Coast for the 2020 college football season. Again, as far as we know, at this point in the calendar, so we're recording this, it's about 12:30 on Tuesday, July 28th. Here's what we know, and we usually have brought in over the last couple of weeks, we brought in a guest from that conference to kind of talk about the status, and I'll just give you a little peek behind the scenes. Struck out with a couple different interview requests this week. So it's just going to be me giving you the update. Basically, the latest news that we've been able to see from the Pac-12 is that a couple of schools, a handful, USC, Cal, Washington State, have closed down the idea of in-person classes for the most part here this fall. They're going to do remote learning for the most part here this fall. But campuses are still open. And for that reason, athletics, things like ROTC, some different labs, different grad courses, things like that are still happening on campus. So until the campuses are completely closed, athletics are still going to go on as planned, and right now we're talking weeks away from players reporting for training camp and other students, because the student housing is still open on campus as well. All of those students will be returning here in a few weeks. So we're going to see how this goes. And again, we're all kind of flying by the seat of our pants here on the outside, waiting to see how all of these different conferences are going to approach this. Still waiting word on a number of these conferences in terms of how they're going to approach out-of-conference play. The Pac-12 was one of the first to announce that they are going only with conference play. So shortening down their schedule. It looks like they're all going to play a lower amount of games this year, but only against the teams in their conference. We'll see if the Pac-12 decides to go full-on round robin, but I think ultimately when you look at the Pac-12, a lot of talented players, a lot of talented teams, a couple of teams that were right on the brink of the playoff last year in Oregon and Utah, some young teams on the rise, certainly. When you look at Arizona State, certainly USC, Stanford is always there to be able to compete. Oregon State's got some players this year. Washington, I didn't even mention yet. Washington State always has players, so a lot of fun prospects we're going to break down here. It's time now for Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, back here to break down another conference as we prepare for whatever the 2020 season looks like. Happy to be joined this week once again by Dane Brugler from The Athletic, Ben Fennell as well. Guys, let's talk through the West Coast. So let's go through the Pac-12 this week. And, we start things off every single week with who we believe to be the top prospect in the conference. Rather than even, let's cut through it this week. This is the Penei Sewell discussion. Let's talk through the Oregon left tackle. Dane, love to get your thoughts on Penei Sewell now going into his junior season.
Yeah, he's, first of all, he is going into his junior season, but he doesn't even turn 20 years old until October. So he's a very young junior. And even though he is young, he plays like, a guy that's ready for the NFL. Now, there's still some things he needs to work on. He'll get out-angled at times in the run game, some of it, the technique stuff. But, man, the way he moves, he's well-timed with his movements. He's very efficient, flexible, so he keeps his knees bent, keeps in a ready position, always looking for someone to block. He has that attitude, that competitiveness to him. The mental part is there. You see the quick eyes, you see him process things really quickly. And then the physical part, the athleticism, excellent in space. He can advance to the second level with ease. The strength is there, grip strength. He can control rushers once he locks on. So there's a lot to like about Penei Sewell. He just has that big man balance. And that's what I love the most about him after studying his tape. So to me, he is one of the top 5 players that I've evaluated so far for 2021.
I find it hard to believe that I'm going to watch a better prospect this spring. We'll talk about the quarterbacks in the next couple of weeks, and we've talked about some great players already, but I mean, Penei is just so impressive, both from a physical standpoint and all the different tools that you talked about, but also like his mentality. You know, he's got some things that he can work through from a pad level standpoint and things like that. But overall, man, like this kid is really impressive. And Ben, before I get your thoughts on him, I talked with a couple of the guys that went up against him last year. I talked with Bradley and who was really impressed with him from a technique standpoint. He said the most technically sound offensive lineman I faced last year. And then also Marlon Davidson, who saw him in week 1 of last season. Marlon told me not only was he the toughest guy he faced and all that, but also that he had watched all of his freshman tape over the offseason, right, getting ready for that week 1 matchup, Auburn versus Oregon last summer. And he couldn't believe the jump that he made from his freshman year to his sophomore year. So he told me, he was like, it's going to be two different people when you compare his 2019 tape to his 2020 tape. He cannot wait to see what he looks like. But dude, Penei Sewell, just so consistently powerful. Like, you talk with strength coaches, that are, working in the NFL, and they'll say the NFL is a game on power. It's a game on short bursts, moving people, even if you're not going to move them, feet at a time, but if you can just move them just inches at a time. Penei Sewell, consistently powerful, just so athletic, really impressive. Ben, I'm interested to get your thoughts on him as well.
Well, what I love is that he's not just relying on athletic gifts, being bigger, stronger, and being a bully. He's very technically sound. So some of the first things I write down is the ability to fire off the ball, independent hand usage, rarely on the ground. Those are 3 things I love for an offensive lineman. But when we're evaluating his tape last year to this year, let's just talk about what we're going to be expecting that's different, because there's some major differences with that offense. He won't have that senior veteran quarterback that he's protecting for that, had some improvisational ability, knew how to climb the pocket. He also played with 4 senior offensive linemen last year. And this year, Oregon's going in and actually is one of the least experienced offensive line groups with only 1 returning starter in Penei Sewell. So he's going to have a young quarterback, young offensive lineman in the huddle with him. He needs to take that next step mentally and as a leader on and off the field. I did 1 game of his in person. It just so happened he was late for a meeting 2 days before and was benched for the opening drive. So there's just little things he wants to clean up, all those kind of intangibles, being that leader of the offense, a reliable player, because when the whistles are going, he shows us a lot to like on tape. He's a pretty clean, polished prospect.
Yeah, as Dane mentioned, won't turn 21 until October of his rookie year if he were to declare for the 2021.
And really
NFL
quick, Fran,
draft.
the interesting thing is the best pass rusher potentially in the country might be on his own team, that he gets to go against young sophomore Kayvon Thibodeau every day in practice. And that's an iron sharpening iron type of thing. Thibodeau, a true sophomore, not eligible. We'll probably touch on him a little bit later. But I think that's just a really good behind-the-scenes kind of litmus test for both of those players. I think Thibodeau's development and production and his trajectory as a player will only improve going against a player like Penei Sewell every day in practice.
Yeah, you talked about, the offensive lineman that he played with this past year. I talked with a couple of those guys this spring just about, what was it like kind of being there, watching him develop. I got some great stories from Shane Lemieux and some of the other guys on that Oregon O-line. I'll share those at a later date. But, to me, like Penei Sewell, just really impressive. I don't know that there's too much more that we can say. He's a PFF darling. I think he was the top graded offensive lineman in PFF history last year. Didn't give up a sack, didn't have a penalty the year before as a true freshman, was the first true freshman to earn all conference in Oregon history along the offensive line. First true freshman to start in week 1 along the offensive line in Oregon history. Just a really impressive player. All right, guys, I don't know if there's too much more that we can say about Penei Sewell, but let's go over to now the top senior on the offensive side of the ball. Ben, let's go with you here. Let's start things off. Top senior on offense that you see in the Pac-12.
Well, we're going to take a guy that pretty much took a redshirt year. Well, not pretty much. He did take a redshirt year last year with an injury in the opener, and that's Stanford left tackle Walker Little, who was another guy, kind of an offensive line prodigy, 5-star out of Episcopal, Texas, that everybody wanted, was a day 1 starter at left tackle as a true freshman. That's the first since the year 2000 at Stanford, and we know the type of pedigree and prospects they've been pumping out of the offensive line. Also has the background with his uncle having played in the NFL. His grandfather was Gene Little, the New York Giants. He was also at O-line Masterminds with myself and Fran last summer, working on his craft and just trying to get smarter. He was a freshman All-American. He came right out of the gates and was a strong, seasoned vet. And, he's a very technically sound player. Again, a guy that's quick out of his stance, rarely on the ground, balanced, controlled movements, very smooth pass sets, always using his hands out in front, consistent, tight punch. He's not a hugger. He's not a guy with the wide arms, which you just love the consistency in his punches. And he can run the arc really well. Very calm pass sets. He'll pull on occasion, gets good movement in that pro-style run game. He's a really polished player. And the big knock on him now is how is he going to recover from that knee injury he faced in the opener last year against Northwestern. And that's kind of the major red flag with him as a prospect. He's a pretty clean player. Maybe not as much upside and excitement as a Penei Sewell or some of the younger guys around the country, but you're getting a player. I think you know what you're getting at left tackle, and he's going to be that kind of 10-year vet for somebody's blindside in the NFL.
Love it. Dane, I have not done Walker Little. I'm interested to get your thoughts on it, but I know you want to talk about him a little bit later in the show. Who is your top senior on offense from the Pac-12?
Yeah, I was kind of underwhelmed, to be honest with you. Just going team by team around the Pac-12, looking at the top seniors on offense, I wasn't blown away by anyone. I went with Tyler Vaughns, the receiver from USC, and obviously Michael Pittman last year with what he did, stepping up, turning himself into a high second round pick, and St. Brown, going to be a guy we talk about a lot through the process. He's a rising junior at receiver, but Tyler Vaughns, he goes out and makes plays. He's not the most physically imposing player. He's got average height, weight, build, not physically imposing, but he's so light-footed in his movements. At the break point, he can create his own spacing. And so you see him, he'll make catches away from his body. He's got strong hands to win those 50-50 balls. That hand-eye coordination to really adjust, flip his body, stab the football, immediately control his feet along the sideline. Really, really impressive. So I think he's tougher than he looks. I think he can, contested catches don't really bother him that much. He can elevate over DBs. He can stab away from his body. So I think there is something there with Tyler Vaughns. I don't think we're talking about a player that would be drafted top 50 like Michael Pittman. But I do think that he is one of the better, if not the best, offensive senior in the Pac-12 in terms of prospects to the next level.
And Dane, I'm just excited, really quick, Fran. I'm just excited for that quarterback position to settle down because they played with a slew of them last year. Obviously, JT Daniels and Keaton Slovis played a couple of games. He gets hurt. Matt Fink has to come in. So just having that changing of the guard at the quarterback position can be really turbulent on the receiving core. Obviously, Michael Pittman had no problems putting up 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns, but they had a couple seniors transfer and Velvis Jones. So it's Tyler Vaughns and Amon-Ra St. Brown's kind of show on the outside. I think they're going to have huge years.
I actually went with Tyler Vaughns too. And to me, this is a guy that is the kind of receiver that I like. And Ben, I know you're a big fan of this type of receiver as well. And that, his body control, really, really impressive. He's got that stop-start quickness to be able to create his own separation. He can get off a jam at the line. He's got the versatility to play all three wide receiver positions because I think he can separate isolated as an X. He's got enough movement skills to be kind of dynamic, as a movement Z. And he certainly has the separation ability with a two-way go in the slot. He's tough. He's got some focus drops, but overall, I thought he had some reliable hands. To me, just a really well-rounded player that I agree with you, Dane. Maybe we're not talking about a top 50 talent, but I think a guy that's going to find a role in an NFL receiver room and be a solid contributor for an NFL offense. So I actually went with Tyler Vaughns as well, a guy that I'm excited to do even more work on. But I did a very thorough study of him last year, just in case he decided to come out. And I was a big fan of what I saw. I was glad that he went back for another year because I think he's got the ability to be really, really productive with all of those targets leaving the building with Michael Pittman. I think a little bit more of the market share in that offense will be big for Tyler Vaughns and the stat sheet for him. But really,
Fran, you like him a little bit more or less than maybe like Courtney Davis that came out of Texas A&M last year. Similar,
way more
lean, taller slot presence, with good shiftiness and speed. I see a similar type of player, but I think Vaughns has a higher upside.
I like him way more than I liked Courtney Davis for sure. Like to me, like I think it's easy because it's coming from the same school. Like I think he has some Nelson Aguilar in terms of the way that he moves. And Ben, you and I have seen him like up close in training camp every year. Like Nelson, like the way that he's able to get in and out, just the body control that he's got at the break point, really, really impressive. Better punt returner than Nelson was even coming out. So again, I just think that Tyler Vaughns has what it takes to be a really consistent receiver for an NFL team.
I wrote down Josh Reynolds in my comp section. I'm not sure when I wrote that down. I've done a number of Tyler Vaughn games in person over the last 3 years, but Josh Reynolds, another guy, 6'3", 190, tall, lean, another guy that was competitive at the catch point, but again, a guy that can get bumped off his routes with that kind of slight frame and similar issues to a Tyler Vaughns.
Interesting. I like that. All right, let's get to most intriguing underclassmen on offense in the Pac-12. Ben, we will go back to you. We'll start this one.
Well, I think the headliner right here is just say there's 2 players in the country to have 500 receiving, 500 rushing, and everybody wants the dual threat players, especially in the NFL. You want that third down back that can run the ball on early downs and be a threat on third downs. And one of those players is Kenneth Gainwell over at Memphis. We talked about a couple of weeks ago. But Max Borghi, the junior running back at Washington State, is the other player to have 500 yards receiving, 500 yards rushing last year. And, he really fits that similar mold that Christian McCaffrey had out of Stanford. A little undersized, but, good power, good shake, good elusiveness in the open field, catches the ball extremely well. There's some other guys you can compare him to, whether it's an Austin Eckler type of role that he's really carved out in San Diego, just being that undersized back. Probably not going to do a lot of work between the tackles, especially at the next level, but being that third down back, that perimeter back, the change of pace guy, his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield is really, really impressive. And, he's had 28 touchdowns the past 2 years combined and averaging 6.4 yards per touch. Rushing and receiving over the last 2 years combined. So this is a guy that when he gets the ball, he makes things happen. Now, he's just not the prototypical size, height, weight, speed for the next level, but he does a lot of things right. And, I hate to go to that kind of blue-collar white running back like a Danny Woodhead, type of role, but that really is what he looks like, stature-wise, usage-wise. And I think that's how he's going to be projected at the next level. Now, Woodhead was a freak. He was a guy that could run between the tackles, extremely tough. He was a guy that won the Harlan Hill, the D2 Heisman Trophy at Shadron State. Danny Woodhead was always one of the best players on the field when he stepped onto the field. He just needed an opportunity. And I think Max Borghi is a similar player.
Well, it's going to be interesting with Leach now in the SEC. You've got Rolovich coming over from Hawaii, who he runs more of a run and shoot type of offense. It's still going to see a lot of throws through the air at Washington State, but instead of maybe 80-20 pass to run, it might be 60-40. And so it'll be interesting to see with that type of adjustment with the offensive scheme and play call, how he adjusts to that. And if he shows maybe a little bit more with the ball in his hands, from the backfield instead of catching the ball, because we know he can certainly do that.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Really quick, Fran, I just want to say my buyer beware with these types of players in these schemes is this feat has been done before by Washington State running backs. If you remember James Williams coming out a couple years ago, he was also a dual threat guy, caught the ball well in the backfield. I don't think he was a 500, but he was a 400 guy. So the scheme also alludes to this type of production with that player. So I don't expect Borghi to live up to these types of productions in the new offense. And it's also a little bit of that buyer beware that, this scheme kind of force feeds those players out of the backfield.
Yeah, you're taking some words right out of my mouth for what I'm going to talk about a little bit later, because I'm going to talk about Max Borghi a little bit. Dane,
I'm always there to snipe you, Fran. I'm always there to snipe you.
You're always waiting in the weeds. Dane, I know you want to talk about his teammate here in this category too.
Yeah, I want to talk about Abe Lucas, a big right tackle, 6'7", 325 pounds. This is not, necessarily an explosive guy, but he's very smooth in his pass sets. I mean, he does not move as heavy as he looks. And so you rarely see him beat around the corner. He can protect against that inside move. He's got that wide base. And so he's very efficient with his movement patterns. So he can absorb that contact and just keep rushers in front of him. I was eager to watch that Oregon State tape from last year because Rashed, who had led the FBS in tackles for loss last year at 22.5, he was shut out of the at the stat sheet going up against Lucas. Didn't have a single stat: tackle for loss, a sack, anything.
Wow.
And I mean, Lucas is, when you watch him, you wish he was a little quicker. You wish he was maybe a little more nimble. But then you watch him and he doesn't get beat. And it's like, okay, well, this will translate. And so to me, he's a top 50 player. And I mean, I also have to mention, because I couldn't decide who I wanted to talk about, him or Vera Tucker at USC, who might be moving to left tackle, might be staying at guard. We don't really know yet. There's no clear answer yet, but just the fact that he could do it and probably just be fine tells you about his athleticism. He's agile, he's flexible, moves really well. My big issue with him just needs to be better with his sustained skills at the point of attack. But I think both these players, Penei Sewell is going to get all the love, and deservedly so. He's going to be a top 5, top 7 type of player when it's all said and done. I think these two blockers from the Pac-12, Lucas and Vera Tucker, if they declare, because they're both underclassmen, but if they both declare, I think they're both top 50 players making a case for the first round.
Yeah, and really quick, Dean, I just want to add one thing off the field. Abraham Lucas is a guy that's put on nearly 40 pounds since freshman year. And there's a lot of articles and videos out there of his early years, especially the redshirt year, his work in the weight room, beating the strength and conditioning coaches into the weight room every morning. Tyson Brown has got a really good program out there. The offensive line coaches have just raved about his work ethic off the field. Obviously got to protege a little bit behind Andre Dillard out there with an NFL pedigree as well. So really just love the situation and his work ethic off the field.
So I'm going to go with a guy that's on their rival, playing for the Washington Huskies, an underclassman, redshirt junior offensive guard who has started each of the past 2 seasons at right guard for Washington. That's Jackson Kirkland. This is a big boy, man. He's 6'7", 323 pounds. And, I talked with a lot of that Utah defense this past offseason, both of the Combine and the Senior Bowl. And I was talking with Lecky Fotu, and I said, Lecky, he was – because Lecky was, unblockable from pretty much anybody. He had his flaws, and I wasn't I didn't think he was, a top 50 pick, but was really unblockable in the Pac-12. And pretty much everybody had issues with him. And I said, who was the toughest guy you saw in a game this year? And he told me, it's Jackson Kirkland. He said he's just so big. He's so long. He was so tough for me to move. I had no problems moving anybody else, but Jackson Kirkland the last 2 years has really given me a lot of issues. And, you're talking about a guy who's got really strong hands, really heavy-handed punch, really tough to move off his spot in the pass game. He's heavy-footed. He's not a superior athlete, and that's going to be the question. So that, to me, is going to limit his ultimate scheme versatility, the teams that are ultimately going to like him more than others. He's not a guy that you really want working up at the second and certainly the third level, whether it be in the screen game or anything like that. But I think when you look at Jackson Kirkland, this is a guy that can do work in the run game, and he's just so hard to be able to move in the pass game. We kind of talked about that, last week. We're talking about different offensive linemen. Some guys are just so difficult to get around. I think when you look at Jackson Kirkland, just a really tough guy to be able to move. And there were guys, I kind of felt that way about Will Hernandez when he was coming out. He ended up being a second-round pick. And I wasn't the biggest Will Hernandez guy because I worried about his overall level of athleticism. He's been a 2-year starter, both years that he's been in the NFL for the New York Giants. So I look at Jackson Kirkland. I think that there are going to be teams that say, with that size, that's something that we can work with here. He won the Offensive Lineman of the Year last year for Washington. We've got 2 guys that ended up being drafted. I believe Trey Adams ended up getting drafted, but certainly against Nick Harris, who was a really talented center for Washington last year. This is a guy that I'm just going to keep my eye on here moving forward. I'm not sure if any of you guys have done Kirkland yet.
Well, Fran, we might as well group both these guys together in Jackson Kirkland and USC's Elijah Vera Tucker, because Kirkland was the right guard last year, moving over to left tackle this year. Elijah Vera Tucker, left guard last year, most likely sliding out to left tackle for USC. So these are 2 guys with a lot of interior experience and interior pedigree, but both their bodies and abilities say, I can hang on the outside. So these are 2 guys that have spent a lot of time at the guard position, but will be kicking out to that left tackle position in 2020. And obviously the versatility and their draft projection just shows, more you can do for an offensive line and have that versatility to play up and down. I think it's just a huge advantage to their stock.
I will be interested to see how he looks at tackle for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. Because when I studied him, I saw a guy that was natural, fit at guard. Yep. He to me is a top 5 guard going into the season. I've got him up there with I mean, Vera Tucker, I have a little bit higher. Ed Ingram from LSU, a little higher. Wyatt Davis is the top guy. Trey Smith from Tennessee. But then Jackson Kirkland, I think he's right there in that mix. So a really talented player with certainly has the size. We'll see if, because it sounds like we know for sure he's moving to left tackle, with Vera Tucker is a little more up in the air. So we're going to see him on the outside with a little more room, a little more, a chance to show a little more range. And so it'll be interesting.
All right, let's flip the script here a little bit, guys. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball, and we will keep it with the Washington Huskies because we're going to talk about a pair of those guys playing for a new coaching – or not a new staff, but a new head coach in Jimmy Lake. Ben, we'll start with you. Your top senior on defense in the Pac-12.
Well, there's a lot of interesting defensive linemen in this conference, and there's a lot of interesting true outside cornerbacks, but we're going to throw a curveball here and go with one of the nickel cornerbacks, and that's Elijah Molden at the University of Washington, who's been arguably the best slot nickel defender in the country the last 2 seasons. 21 forced incompletions, that's 6 more than the next guy. 26 defensive stops, that's 9 more than the next guy at defensive back. He's a guy that will blitz off that perimeter slot. He'll stick his nose in the run game. He's really tough on the perimeter, in the screen game, and just the ball skills, the instincts, the ability to flow through traffic with those two-way goes from the slot receivers. Very willing to press despite that 5'10", 190 frame. I think Dane had him mocked 21st overall in his way too early 2021 mock draft, I think back in April, which really opened my eyes and said, this kid must have something. Let me really dig into his tape. We know the pedigree that Washington's been pumping out with Kevin King and Sidney Jones and Marcus Peters and Byron Murphy the past couple of years. Some of the issues I have, his start-stop sometimes looks a little labored at times, and you face some dynamic slot receivers. I'll tell you what, once a quarter, you do kind of have a knee buckling with having to mirror and guard these really dynamic athletes on the other side. Occasionally, those 50-50 balls will hurt him with his size, and I just want to know, can he hang on an island in the red zone? And the ability to lock down number 1 or number 2 receivers is really that kind of chip to throw to the middle to say you're a first-round corner. And I just want to see him lock up maybe some of those bigger receivers in 2020. But he's put a lot of good stuff on tape, a very productive player, ball hawking type of player. And the only knock really is his size. But we've seen enough players at 5'10", 190 have success in the NFL.
Are we going to end up talking about him as in the safety group in this class ultimately, you guys think?
Yeah, I do. And Ben might disagree because I do think as a slot corner, that might be his best position. But I've talked to several teams that say he's a safety for us. And it's just maybe because of their scheme and how they run things. But I think it's going to be split. We're going to have some teams that see him as, and it kind of similar, with Budda Baker when he was coming out, who, had a little bit of corner to him, had a little bit of safety. Is he a nickel only? Like, where does he fit? And Budda Baker's been a fantastic player for the Cardinals as a second-round pick. With Molden, I don't think he doesn't have that same twitch. But I think he's smart. I think there's a lot to like about him from an instinct standpoint. So I do think that he is going to survive and possibly thrive at the next level. It's just, I think there will be plenty of debate leading up to the draft about where his best fit is, scheme fit, position fit, that type of thing. So it'll be interesting.
I think there's going to be a couple guys, sorry, Fran,
yeah,
in that conversation. And while it's not a Pac-12 player, this is a day 1 first-round player in the 21 conversation. And I think Sean Wade at Ohio State's going to have a similar conversation, who played that nickel position. It's really the size of a safety, tough player, but he's listed as a corner all day long. And I think that conversation is a little more fluid than I think fans and kind of the draft nicks out there are really expecting for 2020, and that these slot players may have a bit of more of a safety pedigree in being called that big safety or a cover safety. Sounds maybe just a little bit better than saying I'm an undersized corner.
Yeah, I've got him in my corner bucket right now, but I think maybe before they even play it down, if they play it down, he might end up being moved over to my safety bucket. Just watching him, I really liked him. Real smart, physical, tough kid. I wrote down, he just feels like a glue guy in a secondary, right? Like not a true shutdown player on the outside. Like we haven't really seen a ton to make us think like, oh, this guy's going to be, Jalen Ramsey. You think of the top corners in the NFL. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be that, but I think certainly, Dane, you said it, like a guy that's going to stick in the NFL. And I love his competitiveness. I liked his ball skills, just everything across the board. I agreed with you too, Ben, that it's not like his physical tools were out of this world. I didn't see a guy with, outstanding speed. I didn't see a guy with outstanding twitch who could, stay in the receiver's hip pocket, on command. I didn't necessarily see that. But a guy that I thought just played with high intensity, high effort, good instincts, ball skills, toughness, run defense. I think he's going to make it in the NFL. I liked Elijah Molden for sure. And of all the guys I mentioned, he's in my corner bucket right now. Of the corners I've done, he's at the top of the list right now. So, this is a guy that I think is going to be able to make it and certainly stick in the NFL as a starting.
And real quick, Fran, before you guys turn it over to the trench player on that same Washington Huskies defense, I just want to show the snapshot in the Pac-12. Veteran, experienced corners all over the place. We just talked about Elijah Molden. Probably could have come out last year, but we have Jack Jones at Arizona State, Chase Lucas, Arizona State. Paulson Adebo is pretty much a national name right now. Cam Bynum at Cal we'll talk about. Oregon's got a bunch of seniors, Damador Lenore, Thomas Graham, bunch of guys that probably could have come out last year. This Pac-12 secondary is loaded with talented, experienced players, and I think it's just a really exciting year for them, especially on the back end. That's not even talking about the safety groups with USC as a tandem that will turn your head around. And I'm just really excited for this Pac-12 defense that's kind of been, a little bit underachieving with producing to the next level in the past, 5-6 years outside of some of those Washington players.
No, that's a good point. Dane, Ben mentioned it. We're going to shift our attention to the defensive front here for Washington. You and I wanted to talk about the same player here. I'll let you kick things off.
Yeah, and when I was looking at the Pac-12 seniors on the defensive side of the ball, Ben mentioned the two corners at Oregon. I like both of them with Lenore and Graham. I thought about those guys, but I just kept coming back to Onwuzurike, Levi Onwuzurike. I got to get that pronunciation right. He's a productive player, and he's disruptive, quickness, power. He can play the pass. He can rush the passer. He can play the run. You see the lateral quickness, so he can work multiple gaps. He's got a quick dip move. He can just quickly get upfield. He'll do some stuff on special teams. He's got a blocked punt. And the way they mostly use him is as a nose tackle and kind of that hybrid 3-man front that they run. So, there are things about him I dislike. He rushes way too tall at times. He can be easily redirected when he exposes his body like that, loses in the leverage game pretty early. But with his quickness, with his power, I'm on board. And I tell you, there's a lot of love out there for Marvin Wilson, the defensive tackle, Florida State. I think they're neck and neck in terms of the top senior defensive tackle prospect. I think they're both in the second round range, Marvin Wilson and Onwuzurike. I think they're both right there as we enter their final seasons as just productive players who have bright futures ahead of them.
Dude, I'm right there with you, and you said a lot of the same things that I wrote down in terms of the pad level, which I kind of think might be coached in that scheme. I looked around at some of the other defensive linemen. A lot of those guys were coming off playing high. They're playing with some two-gap technique where they're trying to play peekaboo over the top of the offensive linemen, so they're trying to play a little bit tall, and that got him in trouble. He could get steered off his spot. He could get pushed facing the sideline, and that would kind of get him into trouble at 288 pounds playing inside. But look, this kid. You talk about the 3 stages of the rush, right? I had Eagles defensive line coach Matt Burke over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast a few weeks ago, and he talked. He worked under Gunther Cunningham out in Detroit, and he said, Gunther Cunningham broke it down into 3 different stages. The pass rush. He talked about the get off, win at the top of the rush, and then that secondary burst. That's that ability to close and finish. That's the one part that I feel a lot of defensive linemen are missing. In order to be that elite guy to be able to get after the quarterback, you need to have that secondary burst, whether that comes in power, but really that short area burst to be able to close and finish. I look at Levi Onwuzurike and I say, okay, this guy's got initial quickness out of his stance. He times the snap really well. He's got that twitch to be able to get off the ball. He's always one of the first Huskies out of his stance. He's got to get a little bit better at the top of the rush. There are flashes. He's got a nice little quick club swim move. He's got an arm rover. He's got actually a pretty nice spin move as well. He's still got to just get a little bit better there. But then he's got that burst to close, man. And again, when you're talking about upside and what can this guy be, I watched him, and the play personality on this guy, he was an absolute tone setter for that defense, making plays outside the numbers, diving and pulling down ball carriers with one hand. The way that he played with his hair on fire like that reminded me of a Grady Jarrett inside. Just his ability to win with that quickness out of his stance. You got some shades of like Dominique Easley, who was a first-round pick coming out of Florida. Just a penetrator, disruptor. Even if he didn't make the play, he was able to kind of change the course of the play because of his ability to disrupt. Heavy, violent hands. Love the hands on this kid. Just really his whole game based on initial quickness. I loved everything about him, and I agree with you when you stack him and Marvin Wilson. And I like Marvin Wilson. I think he's got some similarities to Derek Brown. I like Onwuzurike a little bit more because I think he's got more upside as a pass rusher. These two guys are really, really fun. We're going to talk about Marvin Wilson next week. Onwuzurike, really, really fun player to study.
Fran, you ever watch players like this? Fran, you ever watch players like this and say, you know what, why do they move him around so much? Sometimes I feel like the scheme usage doesn't do him any favors. He'll literally play every technique throughout the course of a game. I just found third down snaps the other day of him lining up in a wide technique outside the tackle with Joe Tryon. Yep. It's like this guy is a prototypical three-tech. Put him on the weak side of a formation at three-tech, let him get on the half man of a guard, and let him go to work. I hate seeing him at nose tackle, especially on early downs. I hate all the moving around. Let him work some one-on-ones and beat up on and yes, absolutely see those heavy, violent hands. But the downside of that is he almost hand fights a little too much. Right. Relies a little bit too much on that. Doesn't play with a lot of leverage. His pad level stinks at times where he just pops right up and wants to box you and fight you. He wins most of those fights because he has long, heavy hands. But just want to see him clean up the technique a little bit. But he's got the get off. He's got the hand usage. He's got the motor. A lot to like about this kid.
I really want to talk to him and get a sense of if that's how he was coached in terms of the pad level. Because you see a lot of two-gap technique with him. So I really would like to talk to him and just get a sense. Remember, too, this kid was coming out of high school as a defensive end that they slid inside. He put on a lot of weight. He was a defensive end at Allen High School, that powerhouse where, Kyler Murray and Cedric Ogbuehi, a bunch of guys have been coming out of that high school over the last few years. Just a really, really fun player to study. But all right, guys, let's get over now to the underclassmen ranks. Most intriguing underclassmen on defense in the Pac-12. Dane, we'll let you kick this one off.
To me, this is Javon Holland from Oregon, the safety who, watching Oregon's defense last year, this is a player that kept popping off the screen. Who's this number 8? Who is this guy that keeps making plays? The range, the ball skills, the awareness, his athleticism. He's got 9 interceptions this first 2 seasons at Oregon, and that's the ball kind of finds him because he's in the right place, right time. He makes those plays happen. Just a really, really impressive player. I think he's the top safety in the country, and I think he's got a chance to be the first safety drafted. I'm a big fan of his and what he could do, because we saw what he did as a freshman and a sophomore, really good. Now, what can he do as a junior? Is he going to be even better? That's a very experienced secondary, so he benefits from just the veteran presence that he has back there. But I think it's going to be another big season for Holland, and I think the first round's in his future.
I liked Holland. I watched him. I watched that whole Oregon secondary late last week, and this is a kid that's got all the physical tools. Dane, you mentioned like you see the twitch, you see the range. He spent a lot of his time in the slot, so you see a lot of man coverage stuff. My big question with Javon Holland is that I do feel that he can give up as many big plays as he can make for you. He's been a turnover machine. He's one of only a handful of players in the FBS to have 4+ interceptions in each of the last 2 seasons. But I did see him give up a couple of big plays in coverage where his eyes got stuck in the backfield a little bit too long, and he kind of lost the relationship with his man, both in man coverage and in zone coverage. So I do want to see him get a little bit more consistent there with his eyes. But, man, when this guy has the ability to play the ball in the air, just a really, really impressive kid that I think's got some positional versatility there on the back end. Ben, I know you studied him as well.
Yeah, really interesting nickel player. Again, just that deep secondary group in the Pac-12 this year. Deep on the University of Oregon alone. They have tons of prospects on that back end, especially seniors. But again, a ball hawking player, a guy that spent a lot of time on the offensive side of the ball in high school, which we love for our defensive back pedigree, just having those natural ball skills, not panicking when the ball's in the air. But yeah, completely agree with some of those concerns you have as well. And just really want to see him kind of clean up some things in the run game and his tackling in the open field. But a guy that's a couple ticks behind Elijah Molden on my rankings, but a very productive player.
He grew on me as a run defender the more I watched. The early games I watched, I was like, oh, man, this is going to be a big concern for me. I don't know if – and then the more I watched, I was like, all right, he's a little bit more of a willing
run that's funny that you say that, because sometimes those first couple tastes of a player, I have a tough time getting that stigma and reputation out of my head. If maybe a corner I just put on misses a tackle early, it's like you have that bad taste in your mouth where you're almost expecting it. Where I feel like I should maybe give him another chance, and watch some of those later games and start with that clean slate again.
I actually wrote it down, like in my notes. Like I had it written down, like, some of those kinds of things, like, oh, I'm not sure about him as a run defender, that. And then I ended up going back and changing it because I'd seen enough to make me think, like, all right, like.
Whoa, there's no changing things, Fran. Once that's in, that's chiseled in stone, all right?
Twitter never forgets. Ben, who is your time? Because I know that you're the guy you want to talk about is one you're very passionate about.
I'm excited about this kid. He was a down-the-road freak show of mine in 2018, and what that is one of the superlatives I do coming back from my ESPN college football games every weekend is I like to talk about a kid that showed out that wasn't eligible. And this was a redshirt freshman defensive tackle at University of Southern Cal, Jay Tufele. And I had no idea about him until I saw him against Washington State in 2018. This guy is a really interesting player. He was a number 3 defensive tackle in 2017 behind Marvin Wilson, number 1 player in Utah, despite having a torn ligament in his foot and didn't play his senior year. But had to take that red shirt early in USC and then came on the field in 2018 and just dominated. Lethal combination of being powerful and balanced.
Yep.
And I think you see that in all aspects of his game. He's very active to float to the ball. He's really tough to knock off his feet and to move him. He can get upfield and collapse the pocket with bull rushes, swim moves, really nimble in some of those twists and games and stunting with some other linemen as well. But that combination of being balanced and having power, and you just see that time and time again. His pad level's not always great. His eye level's down at times, and he doesn't want to find the ball. He just wants to disrupt and blow guys up. And he likes to lead with his hands. And because of that, he just doesn't snap his hips enough. And I put up a clip on Twitter a couple of days ago that I had posted from pregame last year against BYU, where you see him working against the bottom piece of the field goal post, and you just don't see any of that hip snap off the ball. So there's some technique things, but he is so freakishly strong waking up in the morning. Very, very interesting player. He's going to be a redshirt junior this year. It'll be his 3rd year on the field, and just a really fun player, strong player to watch. He's probably going to be a one shade that can, kick out the 3-tech in the NFL. But I think he has some versatility, but definitely a between the tackles player.
I have him and Onwuzurike in the same bucket. I like Onwuzurike just a little bit more, but Tufele is really, really fun. I think they're very similar, man.
Some of the names I have written down real quick, Fran, is like Ziggy Hood out of Missouri a couple of years ago, who just – you couldn't get rid of this guy in the NFL. He was just a strong player that had some positional versatility. If you remember Broderick Bunkley, first-round pick to the Eagles as well, another similar player, Tank Johnson. There's a lot of guys he really reminded me of, and I think he's not done ascending as a player. I'm really excited to see him to the backside of his career at USC.
Interesting. I really liked Tufele on film. I did him. He was one of the first guys I did actually after this draft. I did him back in May. All right, so the guy I want to talk about, Ben, you actually mentioned his name earlier, and that's Paulson Adebo, the corner from Stanford. 6'1", just over 190 pounds. He's going to be a 3-year starter this year. He's started since his redshirt freshman year in 2018. Has been first team all conference each of the past 2 seasons. This is a kid that you kind of go back to the conversation with Elijah Molden, where I don't see a really impressive, like high-level athlete. A lot of his teammates over the last couple of years, going back to 2018, have raved about his athleticism. I remember like Dalton Schultz and like Caden Smith like telling me about like, oh, this Bobby Okereke back in 2019, like, oh, watch out for Paulson Adebo. This kid's going to be a special player. His blend of size and athleticism. I don't quite see the athleticism on the film, but I see a guy who's athletic enough. And then when you pair that with his toughness, his instincts, his ball skills, all the other traits that I really, really value at the position. I'm not saying he's Tre'Davious White, but I think of kind of making that, like, I go back, I love Tre'Davious White coming out of LSU. And I think that what did I like most about Tre'Davious White? He was really versatile. He was smart. He was tough and competitive, instinctive. He was coverage versatile. He could really do a lot of different things for you on the back end. And I think with Paulson Adebo, a lot of the same stuff. Hasn't been just an outside player, has slid inside in a lot of their nickel packages and played on the inside and been a matchup guy, again, at over 6 foot, over 190 pounds, really good run defender. I just feel good about his ability to stick in the NFL. Whether or not, he reaches that level of upper echelon corner, I'm not quite sure there yet. But this is a guy that I think, has that ability to be able to stick and be a starting player in the NFL with some inside-outside versatility. I'm not sure if either of you guys have done deep dives on Adebo yet. I do get how he can be a little bit polarizing, so I'm interested to get your thoughts.
Yeah, he's very polarizing. He's tough because there are times where you see him use that length. He's a very smart player. He has a quick processor. He can, survey things quickly and react. He's very aggressive downhill. So there's a lot to like about him, but I don't know. I have a tough time getting past the stiffness in his lower body, the separation that he gives up out of breaks. He just doesn't have the burst to match some of the sudden receivers he went up against. And some of it, that side saddle technique, it helps contribute to him being a little late to comeback patterns, things like that. But, I'm watching, him against Gabe Davis in UCF last year, and just a simple double move, and he's dead meat. So, there's certain things about his game. You don't give up on a player like that because there's obviously a lot to like about him. It's just, can he do enough with his strength, with his smarts, with his length, that is going to be able to overcome some of the deficiencies that you see on his film?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Dane. I have a note in here. It said 2019 UCF receiver Gabe Davis torched him.
Yep.
And then I have my pros: physical, savvy at the catch point, size and length combo, good in the red zone, strong down the field. All the cons: lacks the agility, athleticism. His start-stop is very clunky. Misses tackles. He's a bit of an ankle biter. Heavy feet. Doesn't have that twitch on the start and stop. So I think that's just kind of echoing all the points you guys made as well.
Go back and check some of the more run plays, Ben. He'd be a guy you mentioned earlier that you write off them a little bit early on the
Nope, I watched him in 2018. His report's done. He cannot change as a prospect.
Yeah, I actually kind of liked him as a run player. I thought you saw some good stuff, especially when he played.
Hey, I didn't say he was a bad run defender. I just say he's an ankle biter. He could be a good ankle biter. Whatever it takes to get him down,
All right, well, let's get into some sleepers here, guys. Let's talk about our biggest sleeper, someone who we thought was just kind of flying under the radar based on who we've studied so far and what we're kind of hearing about them in the media space. Ben, I'll let you kick things off here.
Well, this is going to be a weird one because this guy's a preseason first-team All-American, not a Pac-12 first team.
Can I just say that if I pulled this kid out for this category, you would be running me under the rails for this one. Like you would.
I have a red card sitting right here, and I was ready to pull that out if you try to stunt like this. But this guy was a first-team preseason All-American from Phil Steele, a guy we all love and trust with his evaluations and rankings. And that's Oregon State defender. That's right. Oregon State defender, Hamilcar Rashed Jr. This is a undersized, overhang outside linebacker, undersized defensive end at 6'4", 235. And just listen to this guy's stat line last year. 14 sacks, 22 TFLs. Very productive player. And just to make an all-encompassing statement, look back at your notes for the Kentucky's Josh Allen a couple years ago. Very, very similar player, usage-wise, production-wise, issue-wise, being that taller, skinnier player, struggles at the point of attack. He's not a guy that's going to pop you, stack and shed you, hold his ground. But he's a guy that plays with really good anticipation in the snap, good first step, great at getting around blocks and shooting gaps, makes a lot of plays in the backfield with darting, slashing movements. His eyes are always up, and just having that anticipation and pursuit of action behind the line of scrimmage. But all those same issues to Josh Allen, a little bit light in the butt, a little bit, light in the hands and taking on blocks, even tight ends. But he's a really productive player, and he just seems like he's going to be one of these guys that makes his way to the Seattle Seahawks at some point.
Yeah.
Seems like that Bruce Irvin style of player. I wrote down Julian Peterson that came out several years ago at 6'5", 231, another tall, leaner, undersized edge player, but extremely productive. I'd just like to see Hamilcar add maybe another 10, 15 pounds, maybe could put a couple rocks in his pockets at the combine and get up to 250 there. But a very productive player and a fun player and a bit of an unsung player despite all those accolades and being a first-team preseason All-American.
So he went to Chandler High School, all right, and this is down in Phoenix,
only for
Arizona.
his senior year there. Only a senior year. He transferred for his senior year, which I don't get how that happens, but whatever.
But his junior year, before he transferred, he had 10 sacks in one game.
I know, I saw that. That's wild. But at Chandler senior year, he got to play with Chase Lucas, corner at Arizona State. Got to play with N'Keal Harry, who's now a New England Patriot. Really deep program there at Chandler.
They put out Cam Jordan as well, if you're talking about in terms of NFL pass rushers.
Yep, exactly.
I watched Rashid actually just the other day, a couple nights ago, just preparing for this for this podcast. The name I wrote down was Tyus Bowser when Bowser was coming out of Houston. And I feel like he's got – because I'll tell you what, man, like he's not just a straight-ahead player. He looks pretty good in reverse. Like he can do some things as like a strong side linebacker too, in my opinion. I think he's got some of that scheme versatility that some teams are going to really, really covet and really, really value. Whether playing in zone coverage, playing in man, he played man-to-man against the back. He played man-to-man against the tight end. I was pretty impressed with that kid, for a number of different reasons. He's got that inside swim move. That's his go-to to try and win the B gap, whether it's a late counter or if he's trying to use it off the ball. But no, I like Rashid. I think he's got some ability. I agree with you, though. I'm worried about the run game. That's he can do a couple different things for you in the pass game. Run game is going to be a bit of a concern.
And really quick, Fran, just to fill out the conversation, because Cal has a player that's almost identical in Cameron Good. He's a nice edge player at 6'3", 6'4", 235. Another guy that's undersized, but really fits that same mold. Also, he's a redshirt senior coming off a big year at 9.5 sacks and 14 TFLs on that interesting Cal defense. But a similar conversation, just being a little light in the pants there, but a productive player.
Dane, who do you want to hit on?
Well, real quickly on Rashid, I agree with you about – because there are times where he will just misfire with his hands. And if it's body to body, he doesn't really have much of a shot. But I did see some promising things in the run game that gives me a little bit of hope. You saw him, he'd widen his stance so he can contain the edge, close down the corner. The pursuit is great. So he's interesting. I'm not in love with him. I think he's probably like a borderline top 100 type of guy for me. I love this pass rush class. I think it's going to be a deep, deep group, both seniors and underclassmen. So I think he's got a lot of work to do just to, figure out where he fits in with this group. But there are definitely plenty of promising traits that he shows. So for my biggest sleeper, I'm going with Bryant Keithy, tight end out of Utah, who I know not a lot of people know. And, with scouts, they went to Utah last year to watch Zach Moss, all the dudes they had on defense. And it was Keithy who kept kind of showing out, and he led the team in receiving as a tight end. He's not your traditional tight end. He's almost a bit of if you combine a receiver, a running back, and a tight end in a one position, throw H-back in there as well. That's what Keithy is. He can line up in the backfield. He'll line up in line. He'll line up detached. He can do all these things, and he's a very good athlete, big-time athlete. He can make guys miss. He has toughness. He doesn't have the size or length that you want. So I don't know that every scheme is necessarily going to find a spot for him, but he can play so many roles. You can come in and play a big role on special teams. I'm just a big fan of him. When I did my tight end preview on The Athletic, he ended up being a top 5 tight end for me in the country. So I'm a big fan of his and eager to see what he can do as a junior this coming season.
Love it. I have not done him yet, so excited to dig in a little bit deeper on Keith.
And just to paint the full picture on him, is he's a kid from Texas. Doesn't seem like he's going to be taking a church mission or anything like that. They have another tight end prospect, Cole Fotheringham, I believe, who just got back from his mission, more of a run blocking tight end. But this kid doesn't seem like he's going to be departing anytime soon.
So for my pick for this category, I went with the guy that actually stood out to me as I was studying other people. And I told you that I watched that Oregon secondary. There's like 6-7 names to watch in that Oregon secondary. You got the two corners and Lenore and Graham. You've got
you get one name, Fran. You get one name.
I know.
Ruin
So
it.
I was watching Javon Holland, and I'll tell you what, man. Number 23, Verone McKinley III, who was a redshirt freshman last year, now draft eligible as a redshirt sophomore this year. He's 5'10", 185 or 195. So on the smaller side, but this kid was really impressive. Plays like his hair is on fire, has all the athletic tools that I would look for in an NFL defensive back. I liked his change of direction, real twitchy kid, but also really good range to cover ground. He would play in the post. He would play in the slot. High energy run defender, a really willing, methodical player in the alley who can break down and finish one-on-one. I mentioned I thought he had the range to be able to play in the center field and be effective sideline to sideline. I'll tell you what, if Holland decides to come out this year, right, and McKinley stays in, he will be, to me, one of the guys I will view as a big chance to be a big riser for 2022, because I think, with him taking a little bit more of the mantle there in the secondary, he could be in for a big year. And that might happen this year because, again, Holland spends a lot of his time down in the slot. McKinley, most of his time in the post. It's going to be I think he's got the ability to be a really, really intriguing player. There's still some to come along mentally. I think he's got some steps to take there in terms of his mental processing and play recognition and things like that. But I really liked Verone McKinley. I was intrigued by his upside. Again, a little bit on the smaller side, but I love those safeties with a corner skill set. All right, guys, let's go to
that secondary is like 6, 7, 8 players deep. They have young players, old players, transfers. Mm-hmm. I also love, he sent me a message back in May on Twitter and just said, hey, man, I've been following you. Would like to know your thoughts on my first year, anything I need to do from year 1 to year 2 to improve my game. And I just love a player reaching out of the blue, looking to get better, not taking anything too personal or being too, big-headed at a big school like he's working on his craft and not afraid to, for lack of better words, reach out for help and reach out for opinion.
McKinley did that?
That was McKinley, yes. I mean, I messaged on Twitter back in May, yeah. So
very nice.
Just developing a nice relationship with him behind the scenes.
Love that. All right, well, let's get over to the next category here, guys. That most approved. Someone with something to prove. Maybe they're coming off an injury or there's a different scheme change. And I'll kind of kick things off with Max Borghi, just because we talked about him a little bit earlier. Dan, you talked about the transition from the air raid with Mike Leach to going to more of a run and shoot there this year. Out in Washington State. To me, like if we're talking about guys who can be versatile players in the backfield, versatility isn't just pass game value. You also have to be able to prove yourself as a runner. I'd like to see Max Borghi just give a little bit more as a runner this year. You mentioned the change in potential splits. If they go from 80-20 to 60-40, how much more work can Borghi take on in the middle of the field, between the tackles, being able to kind of pick his way through traffic? I'd like to see him get a little bit better in that area. Very proven as a route runner. He's got great hands. He does all those things really, really well in the passing game. I liked what I saw even in pass protection. I thought that he's got some ability there to be able to stand up and be a blocker next to the quarterback. I think he can do some things in space. If you use him in draws and things like that, hey, we're just going to give him a runway and go. I think he can do that. I'd like to see, hey, can this guy develop into a number 2 back? Can this guy, if we need him to go in and be an every down backup, can he be that? That's what I want to see this year from Max Borghi in a different scheme. I know you guys have already talked about him, so we'll get to your player next. Dane, we'll start with you here. Who do you want to talk about here with the guy that's got the most to prove on the West Coast?
Well, and we already talked about Walker a little, but I did want to mention his name here a little bit because I was not very high on Walker Little. I think there's a lot to like, but to me, I saw average feet. I saw plenty of times where speed would stress him out. His feet would get stuck in the mud. He would struggle with those inside moves. Too much of a catch blocker for me. But he's got the size. I think he has ability. It's just I want to see it more on a consistent level. So missing all of last season, technically has a red shirt. So he has 2 more years in college to get better. I just want to see that this year. Want to see him get better and improve. The other guy I wanted to talk about was Jack Jones, who he's kind of the perfect person for this category with most to prove. Big time recruit out of Long Beach, and goes to USC, spends 2 years there, and is pretty productive. He gets on the field quickly, and he makes an impact. And you can tell right away, okay, this is a guy we need to be watching for the future. and then some academic stuff, some off the field stuff. He has to, leave the program, and you don't know what his future holds. And he ends up going kind of to the JUCO level, and then he transfers to Arizona State last year, where he started one game, but he came off the bench in plenty of other games, and he was really productive. Got his hands on a lot of footballs and made another name for himself. But he's a little undersized. He's 5'9", 175 pounds. He's not the biggest guy, but as an athlete, as a guy who just has that natural cover technique, you can see that. And so he's got a lot to prove in terms of both on the field and off the field for a team to, because if he's got a clean prospect, we're talking about a guy that's going to get top 100 love, but he has a lot of work to do in terms of making sure teams are comfortable with who he is as a player and as a person.
Ben, I know you want to talk about Jack Jones too.
Nope, we're going to okie doke you guys, and we're going a different direction here for most to prove. All right? Here's a question for you, Fran. How many USC safeties are in the NFL right now? Just take a guess.
I'm going to say 0.
Well, there's one, Marvell Tell. He might be on his way out of the Indianapolis Colts. But I think that's all about to change with this duo down at USC and Taloa Hufanga. Did I get that right, Fran?
I don't know. I haven't done them yet, so I haven't.
And Isaiah Polamau are both two big safeties, high recruits, 4-star kids. And the most to prove, I just want to see these kids stay healthy and stay on the field. Isaiah Polamau had a huge first game in 2018, then had a shoulder injury, missed the rest of the year. And last year, Hufanga also had a postseason shoulder injury, missed the spring, missed a couple games as well. These are two really interesting playmaking safeties. Hufanga is more of that sub linebacker, the whole player, likes to come down, good tackler, angles, good plays on the ball, good in run support. Polamau, yes, that's nephew of Troy Polamalu, is more of a back-end rangy guy, really impressive interception I put out on Twitter a couple days ago, more of that free safety ball hawk. But he's 6'4", 205. Hufanga 6'1", 220. Really interesting safety combination here. A conference that hasn't put a lot of safeties into the first round of the NFL draft the last 20 years. I think it was Deion Buchanan out of Washington State and Troy Polamalu, and that's it for first-round safeties. But I think that could change. I think Dane as well mocked Hufanga 27th overall back in April. Mm-hmm. So this is a guy that's got some first-round love, first-round pedigree. I just want to see them both stay on the field, dominate in the stat sheet, and be that playmaking ball hawks on the back end for the defense.
I haven't done the USC kids yet. I did do Jack Jones literally last night, and I actually wrote down, and off-field stuff aside, just like what I saw on field, I wrote down Pac-Man Jones, Dane. To me, like all the physical tool, like he's small. I mean, he's 5'9", 170 pounds, but really clean pedal, all the athletic traits in terms of the fluidity, the ability to turn, the ability to carry. Right. He can work vertically. I loved him from his pedal. I loved his reaction quickness in man-to-man. I loved his competitiveness. This guy chirps with receivers every single chance he gets. His ball skills, just natural playing the ball in the air. I watched the Arizona game. I watched the Oregon game. I was really, really impressed with this kid. And obviously, he got on the field early when he was out at USC before the missteps caused him to leave campus there. He was academically ineligible, had the off-field incident. To me, you look at Jack Jones, like if he could keep his head on straight, this kid, I think, has the ability to be able to stick in the NFL, and he can impact returns as well, was a special teamer, as a gunner. There's a lot of ability there. With Jack Jones. And
they have Antonio Pierce, former NFL linebacker down there in the program, Arizona State. He was the former head coach of Long Beach Poly High School, where Jack Jones came from. And he's bringing in a lot of those former kids, sometimes right from high school. Some of them are transfers. But he seems to have a really good rapport and working with these kids, mentoring the kids, and really getting them focused and their heads on straight after maybe a couple of missteps. But Jack Jones, he was a 5-star that everybody in the country wanted. USC got their hands on him, had to transfer with some of those missteps off the field, but seems to be settling in nicely at Arizona State.
And Long Beach Poly, Deshaun Jackson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Jarrell Casey, they're a powerhouse down there in California. All right, guys, let's go. Newcomer on the scene. This could be a transfer or maybe just a guy stepping into a more of an expanded role to replace somebody who'd left for the NFL. Dane, we'll let you kick things off on this one.
Yeah, and I might have cheated a little bit on this one because my player has been with the Arizona State this is his 5th season now. He's a redshirt senior. I went with Frank Darby, the receiver, who, we go back the last 2 years, and Arizona State has produced a first-round wide receiver each year. And so first it was N'Keal Harry. Last year it was Ayuk, and now it's Darby's turn to step up. Okay, so what's he going to do? Is he going to, it's going to be hard for him to turn himself into a first-round pick. That's a lot to ask. But what is he going to be able to do in terms of stepping up into that big play role to be the guy on that offense? That's going to be really interesting to see what he can do. He was represented in Bruce Feldman's freaks list as a guy who, because of his speed, his power, squats 500 pounds in the weight room. The strength and conditioning coach calls him their best worker. So with Frank Darby, it's a lot to ask to see him get into that first round discussion. But he's definitely a name to watch as, okay, can he, elevate himself similar to the two guys before him? So we're talking about him as, not only just a late round guy, but maybe a middle round guy, maybe a guy that's going to sneak into the top 100. So really eager to see what he can do with the spotlight on him as wide receiver 1 down there in Tempe.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into Darby's tape. And one guy that I was really excited to watch after this draft process, I caught up with so many of those guys on that Utah defense. What was it, like 9 of the 11 starters go on to the NFL. Down at the Senior Bowl, talked to a bunch of them, combine, talked to the rest of them. And I said, look, like all of you guys are leaving. Who's going to be the guy for that defense next year? And some of them brought up Mike Tafua, but who's the defensive end that played on the other side of Bradley and I. But to a man, pretty much everybody said Devin Lloyd, who's going to be a rising junior linebacker. They talked about his athleticism, his violence. He's going to be the captain on that defense this year. Played will and stud for them this past year. They think he's going to make the shift inside to Mike linebacker to replace Francis Bernard. This is a high school receiver and safety who didn't play linebacker until he got there on campus. I look at Devin Lloyd. Areas to improve, especially mentally, easily manipulated by stuff in the backfield, just a little bit slow to react, seems a little bit mechanical with everything that he's doing right now. But as this kid figures it out, again, high school safety, very comfortable playing in reverse, asked to play in space, and was really good as a blitzer, especially inside. I think that the tools are all there for this kid to make the next step. Again, only a redshirt sophomore last year. So now you're saying, okay, with another year, hopefully 2 years on campus, what is this kid going to look like in the future? Devin Lloyd, I think, has that upside to be able to turn into what we're talking about in terms of a top 50, top 75 kind of selection, especially with that athletic skill set. Room to grow, still needs to get there. He is not there yet. If he was coming out right now, I would say, man, I just don't know if I could see enough to make him more than a day 3 pick. But I think with the upside, what he could be down the road, really, really impressive player that I'm excited to do more on. Ben, who's your newcomer here?
Well, really quick, I feel like I'm going to just designate this area to talk about transfers each week with the number of transfers across the country. A lot of interesting interconference transfers as well with the Pac-12. But really first, highlighted by Jake Bentley coming over from South Carolina to Utah, likely going to be the starter out there. Colson Yankoff, a lot of people don't know, was Idaho Gatorade Player of the Year. He's on his way to UCLA from the University of Washington. Likely will have to sit behind that athletic quarterback for a year or two. Receiver Devin Williams, high recruit, going from USC to Oregon on a graduate transfer. Another receiver, interconference, Brendan Schooler, going from Oregon to Arizona to go finish his career with his brother, Colin Schooler, the nice linebacker out there, University of Arizona Wildcats. And the last one was interesting is Bennett Williams, Oregon, adding another interesting defensive back player. He's coming over from the University of Illinois, who's actually a freshman All-American a couple years ago, then had a couple missteps out there and had to go JUCO and transferring out to Oregon there. But again, Oregon, 6, 7, 8 players deep on the back end, loaded with veteran senior experience, and Bennett Williams as well. So not really sure the pecking order or the snap distribution with all these players, but just another veteran player on the back end. And I just think there's enough transfers to go around these days in college football.
Sure. Let's get now to the guys that are not eligible for this upcoming draft in 2021. Our future stud, a guy for us to watch here in the future. I'll kick things off here for this one, guys. I want to talk about Mikael Wright, the freshman. He was a freshman corner last year for those Oregon Ducks, and a guy that, to me, at 5'11", 182 pounds last year, obviously a little bit on the undersized side, but I'll tell you what, long speed, fluid hips, easy change of direction. again, only a true freshman last year playing, but really made a huge impact on special teams, namely as a kick returner. He was the number one corner in the country by ESPN when he came out as a California kid, Antelope Valley High School out there on the West Coast. But Mikael Wright, just a name to keep kind of earmarked. Ben, I know you talked about him, when we were previewing this, doing this episode. You were the one that kind of turned me on to him, so I kept an eye watching him. I'll tell you what, this kid's he's impressive. I don't know if I'm going to say, oh yeah, future first round pick. I'm not saying anything like that, but the tools I thought were really, really impressive.
Well, as I've been highlighting that veteran back end of Oregon and just how impressed I am with all these players, Twitter has not been shy about the fact that I've left out Mikael Wright on a lot of those lists. The fact that he's not eligible and they're just loaded. I just didn't get to his name. I had to include 6 or 7 other names. I lost characters.
Right.
But I'm going to stick with Oregon here in an impressive recruiting haul this past offseason and grabbing not only the number 1 linebacker, the number 2 linebacker in the recruiting class. And one of them is Penei Sewell's brother, Noah Sewell, who is a staggering 6'2", 260-pound off-ball linebacker. And then the number 1 linebacker, 5-star Justin Flo from California out there in Upland. 2 5-star players. I would expect them both to see the field almost immediately, barring any sort of injuries or, maybe missteps in the classroom. But really reminds me of when Miami had Shaq Quarterman, Pinkney, and Zach McLeod all on the field day one as true freshmen. Just really exciting haul there. And it's amazing to, Mikael Wright and these 2 linebackers. And somehow we're not going to talk Kayvon Thibodeau, the stud pass rushing sophomore as well. But a lot of young talent on that defense.
So Sewell comes in at 260, right? There's 2 things. Either there's no way he's sticking at off-ball linebacker at 260, or he's going to do what his brother did. Because remember, Penei Sewell, when he showed up, he was like close to, I think he was like 360, 370, something like that. And a lot of services had him ranked as a guard for that reason. And then he just completely reshaped his body, and now he's going to be a top 5 pick. I can't imagine he's going to stay at linebacker at 260, right?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, there's several articles here. He touched the ball a lot in high school. I just clicked on an article, Noah Sewell set to play offense and defense at Oregon. He might be a fullback, H-back, outside linebacker. Who knows? These kids have rugby backgrounds. They have great feet, speed, in combination with that size and strength. A lot of people have told me over the past calendar year that this kid is an absolute freak show athlete. I thought the 266 on his recruiting profile was a typo. Right. I just thought there was no way he was 266, but this is a very, very unique player. And there's another Sewell brother out there in the Pac-12, I think Utah.
It's Utah, yeah.
Yeah, but just an incredible pedigree and family of incredible athletes.
Let's make this guy Brandon Graham. Let's put his hand in the ground. Let's get him coming off the edge.
Hey, if they both walk down the hallway without helmets and pads on, they're probably a similar stature and frame. Brandon probably a little thicker in the core at this point in his football career, but just a really unique player.
All right, Dane, I know you want to talk about a guy who both Ben and I both have really liked the flashes we've seen of Drake Jackson.
Yeah, Oregon's loaded. We know that. But USC has a few impressive young guys with Chris Steele at corner, and then Drake Jackson on the defensive line. He kept jumping off the film whenever you watch that USC defense as a true freshman last year. 6'4", 260. And you see the power. You see a guy with a body that you can mold. He led the team in tackles for loss last year with 11.5, and he even missed 2 games due to injury. He had a bum ankle. So this is a player that I made sure I wrote his name down a few times, as this is definitely a player to watch. He's got a bright future ahead of him. So excited for some of these young players on that USC defense.
Yeah, that Chris Steele players, these transfers are getting strange. He was a 5-star, went to Florida, transferred from Florida in the span of like 2 or 3 months, and then still had his freshman season at USC. So he went to an SEC school, transferred out before any season or anything even took place. So some of these transfers are getting very premature and quick. It's kind of tough to keep up.
No question.
Right, and I think we need to mention Keaton Slovis too, who is kind of emerged. I think, Ben, you mentioned it earlier, the muddy situation at quarterback for USC. Well, I think Slovis has kind of emerged as the guy. And, he doesn't have that huge body at 6'2", 200. but he's really accurate with the football. He can anticipate down the field, really confident player. So eager to see what kind of next step Slovis takes as a sophomore for the Trojans.
And they seem to have given him the keys. The fact that JT Daniels is on his way out after having a pretty nice freshman season with his high school receiver and Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. So JT Daniels on the way to Georgia out there. But Keaton Slovis is on his way to an incredible season before Lecky Fotu rattled his brain off the ground there in that one game. And then really couldn't get back on the field with the head injuries. And they had Matt Fink and all different guys back there. But seems like it's Slovis's show to lose right now.
Yeah, with year 2 of Graham Harrell calling the shots down there offensively, I think.
Oh, that's right.
That USC offense is poised for some big things if they can get some consistency at quarterback.
Yeah, I was watching the Colorado game. I was trying to watch Nate Landman, that big linebacker out there, and I saw them put Amon-Ra St. Brown in the backfield. He ran an outside zone touchdown against them. So just another thing that St. Brown can do. Twitter then let me know they had serious injuries at running back that week and had to work on a couple things creatively. But the fact that, just having Graham Harrell for another year with those players on the perimeter like Tyler Vaughn and St. Brown and Keaton Slovis back for his sophomore year, really excited for the future of that program.
We didn't even mention the USC running back Stephen Carr. There are a few guys. Pac-12, look, they're loaded with talent every single year on both sides. Guys, this was an awesome conversation. Really appreciate you guys jumping on once again to talk through some of the top prospects out west. Next week, we're going to do the ACC, so we're coming back to the East Coast, talk about some of the best players more in our neck of the woods. But thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you guys again next week. Really fun conversation there with both Ben and Dane. Make sure you're following both those guys on Twitter. Really fun conversation. Like I said, we're going to talk about the ACC next week here on the show. Look, the best way to support the show, support this podcast, go on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. We always ask you guys to be able to do so. You guys always come through. Philly Fan-AFS came through and wrote a 5-star review saying, great podcast, love all the shows, great interviews, in football insight, love when I see the new episode pop up. So Philly Fan-AFS, thanks so much for leaving the review, leaving that 5-star review. Appreciate the reach out for all of you guys that have gone on, all the support that you guys have all left us, not just for this podcast, but all of our podcast offerings on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. Excited to keep these conference previews going. Like I said, still so much up in the air, stuff that we're still waiting to kind of find out. We're all waiting. We're all hoping that football can make some kind of return, as sports all over the country are making a return here, not just this week, but last week and the weeks to come. So thanks so much to Dane. Thanks so much to Ben. We will see you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.